Good morning and welcome back to World Talks as we discuss the latest from Ukraine. Ukraine will continue to meet its obligations to transit Russian oil to Europe, Mikhailo Podolyak said on Friday, after earlier suggesting it could halt supplies via the Druzhba pipeline starting in January of 2025. The Ukrainian offensive in Kursk continues, and Rustem Umerov is on a visit to Washington, D.C. to discuss all that. I am joined here this morning by Rostyslav Khotin from the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Good morning, sir. Great having you on.
Hello.
So let me start by asking you about the F-16 crash, because the news were released delayed, right, by a few days, and now there's an investigation going on. Also, Mykola Oleszczuk was dismissed. So what happened? What do we know?
We know that it happened on the 26th of August when there was a massive Russian strike against Ukraine. Unprecedented, huge scale, dozens and dozens of missiles, drones were launched against Ukraine at the same, on targets, civilian targets in Ukraine and energy infrastructure at the same time, simultaneously. So Ukrainian air fleet was up in the air, and of course newly supplied F-16s were also guarding Ukrainian skies, trying to intercept missiles. And apparently one of these F-16s, which was piloted by an enormously experienced pilot, and it was hit somehow. There was a problem. We don't know what happened. There were indications that there might be even friendly fire from Patriot missile system, air defense system. Missile hit this plane. It's one option. Another was that it was hit by Russian missile. We don't know what happened. There were three kind of versions, so several options how people, investigators see it, but we don't know. And then this was made public, this fact that Ukraine lost its first F-16 was made public several days later. And on Friday, President Zelensky dismissed the commander of Ukrainian Air Force, General Mykola Oleszczuk, who is also a very experienced serviceman, experienced general, but the PR with this problem with F-16, which was downed, was such enormous that Zelensky thought that it was worth sacking the commander of Ukrainian Air Force. Meanwhile, he also called on Western partners to allow Ukraine to strike military targets on Russian territory, especially when the massive strike against Kharkiv happened yesterday. So there are different things at play at once. But the truth is that, yes, Ukraine has lost its first F-16 out of probably roughly 6 or 7 which were supplied in the initial stage, and more to come by the end of this year. But it was a sad fact that the first F-16 was lost by Ukraine, and we don't know yet what actually happened.
Right. Hopefully we'll find out as the investigation is pending, right? But let me ask you about these targets inside Russia, because Rustem Umerov actually presented a list of targets to senior U.S. officials during his visit to Washington. So do you think that we can expect a formal U.S. response in the near future? What are your sort of predictions on this?
Ukraine has a right of self-defense, and Ukrainians are saying to the Western partners, to Americans first and foremost, that look, what happened. Let's take the story with strikes against Kharkiv yesterday, where high-rise buildings, apartment blocks were targeted by Russian missiles, Russian bombs. Russian airplanes are taking off and dropping bombs near the border with Ukraine, and then these guided bombs are flying into Ukraine. What Ukraine can do? Ukraine can intercept these bombs, but it's very difficult because Kharkiv is located located just over the border with Russia. There is no time, no enough air defense systems, not enough planes in the air patrolling Ukrainian skies, Ukrainian planes, I mean. So Ukraine has to have a right to strike airfields on the Russian territory, not to allow Russian planes with bombs and missiles to take off. So Ukraine has to take preventive measures, kind of to hit the roots of the problem. And the roots are that Ukraine has to have a right to hit Russian aircraft when they are located on airfields in Russia, and not to act, like at the late stage when already missiles and guided bombs are launched by Russian airplanes. Ukraine wants to take preventive measures to hit these airfields, aircraft when they are on their air base on the Russian territory inside Russia.
Right, but I mean, where are these fears stemming from? I mean, U.S. fears of escalation. I mean, so far, it led to no response from Russia, right? The fact that Ukraine started doing just that. So why the delay? What is your prediction on that? What is your hypothesis?
The delay is that the Americans, they don't, the Western partners of Ukraine, they think that it will be escalation. They don't want to escalate it. They don't want to provoke Russia. But, fine. There were several red lines which were crossed by Ukraine. Russia said that there are, for instance, one red line was attack against Russian forces on Russian territory. But Ukraine has launched earlier this month, early August, incursion into Russian Kursk region. So what? Red line was crossed. Ukraine has targeted with its own Ukrainian-made drones Russian airfields on Russian territory quite successfully on several occasions. So there was another red line, so-called Russian red line, crossed. And if Ukraine will have a right to target airfields on the Russian territory with Western supplied weapons, it will be just yet another red line will be crossed. So what? Nothing will happen. Escalation is already in a high temperature, and it won't provoke Russia further. It's already kind of, the full-scale war, open aggression against Ukraine.
Right, so let me ask you about what Mikhailo Podolyak said about the transit via the Druzhba pipeline. He said that Ukraine will hold the transits as of January of 2025, but then he changed his mind, or explained that he did not mean that and that Ukraine will continue the deliveries. So why the confusion?
The confusion is that Ukraine initially wanted to cut off all transit of oil and gas. I just want to remind you that the gas transit contract between Ukraine and Russia will expire from the 1st of January 2025. And Ukraine wanted also to, at the same time, to cut off oil transit as well from the 1st of January 2025. But then probably they looked at the contracts, and contracts envisaged the 10-year period. The contract was signed in 2019 and is enforced till 2029 for 10 years. And Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Hungary depend on these oil supplies. And actually, when the European Union introduced sanctions almost 90% of Russian oil in 2022 after start of Russian full-scale aggression against Ukraine, there was one exception made for Slovakia, Hungary, and the Czech Republic for oil supplies via Druzhba pipeline, because these countries are enormously dependent on the Russian oil. Why? Because they do not have coastline, sea coast. They do not have a sea coast, and they are landlocked. They depend on pipeline, Druzhba pipeline, Friendship pipeline, which goes through Ukraine. Other countries have freer hand because they have sea shores. They can build oil terminals. They can receive oil supplied by tankers. But Slovakia, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, they are landlocked. They do not have seashores, and that's why they are dependent. So Ukraine decided that let's close our eyes. Let's this contract for oil supplies between Transnafta and Transneft company of Russia to continue till 2029. Ukraine actually gets some kind of transit revenues, roughly $150 million a year. That's not big deal. Ukraine is not making money, but huge money out of this contract. But the thing is that these countries, Slovakia, Hungary, and Czech Republic, they depend on this, crucially are dependent on these oil supplies via French Druzhba pipeline. That's why Ukraine kind of closed the eyes and said, fine. And Mikhailo Podolyak, presidential spokesman, said, fine, let this contract stay in place for 5 more years till 2029. But at the same time, more important things are happening on gas front. The gas transit contract will expire on the 1st of January 2025, and Ukraine has no intention to extend this contract. So from the 1st of January next year, there will be no gas transit through Ukraine for Russian gas. But there might be a third party involved. Some Azeri companies and Kazakh gas companies already want to use this gas transit pipeline through Ukraine. There will be some kind of mediatory between Ukraine and Russia, either from Azerbaijan or Kazakhstan. That's how situation looks now with the gas transit through Ukrainian territory from the 1st of January 2025.
So let me just briefly ask you about the current situation on the front lines. What's going on, in Kursk, but also on the front lines in Ukraine around Pokrovsk?
Situation is very difficult in the Donbas area. Russians are pushing on towards Pokrovsk. Evacuation of local civilians is continuing. Ukrainian forces several days ago escaped the cauldron, the kind of difficult situation to the southeast of Pokrovsk. There was Russian intention to encircle Ukrainian troops, but it failed. Meanwhile, in Kursk region, situation is also kind of very dynamic. Ukrainian forces are pushing, like they extended their control for 5 more square kilometers at the end of this week, according to the General Syrsky, the commander of Ukrainian armed forces, General Alexander Syrsky. And also, but Russians regained control of one settlement in Kursk region. Meanwhile, on Friday, Kharkiv, this Ukraine's second largest city, was hit by Russian guided bombs and missiles, and there were a lot of casualties from Ukrainian side. Several people were killed, including teenage girl was killed. It was no military target. It was just, apartment block, the high-rise 12-store building with people living there, and it was brutally targeted by Russian guided bomb in the middle of the day, just in the middle of the day. A horrible crime, and Ukrainian President Zelensky called on Western partners to allow Ukraine to go for the root of the problem, to be able to use Western supplied weapons against military targets on Russian territory, especially against airfields and Russian airplanes.
So let's see what the US will finally say on that. Thank you, sir, for being with us this morning. Rostyslav Khotin, Radio Free Europe. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.